Recently, an article was written in USA Today about the research being done to better understand pedophilia. It is a very well thought out article that you can find in their Health and Life department. After publishing it, internet trolls began attacking the news outlet on Twitter. There are even reports that someone set fire to a building owned by the newspaper. USA Today was forced by the mob to take down the article and hide it behind a paywall. By forcing them to do this, these science deniers effectively silence the writer for publishing facts that don't mesh with their chosen reality. Folks like us who believe in a free-thinking, fact-based society cannot tolerate this kind of abhorrent behavior. And so, in response to this act of internet bullying, we felt the need to address this topic with a video based on our editorial page on our website. Pedophilia is viewed by many, especially internet trolls, as among the most horrifying of modern society's problems. One need only look to the QAnon conspiracy, which is founded on pedophilia. The biggest drawback with that outlook, according to scientists who study the sexual disorder, is that it also is among the most misunderstood. When we hear the word pedophilia or pedophile, many folks automatically assume it's synonymous with child sexual abuse. The term, however disappointing to the masses as it might be, describes an attraction, not an action. And using it interchangeably with abuse or rape fuels the ignorance behind the hatred. The American Psychiatric Association's DSM-5 lists pedophilia as defined by recurrent, intense, sexually arousing fantasies, sexual urges, or behaviors involving sexual activity with a prepubescent child or children. The key word that undereducated folks overlook is prepubescent, or not having reached a state of puberty. That means there's no hormones pumping or secondary sexual characteristics developing. Not simply that the child or person is under 18. To claim that anyone who has an attraction or even relationship with someone younger than 18 as a pedophile is completely wrong. In other words, just because someone has an attraction to a 14 or 15-year-old does not make them a pedophile. Since the onset of puberty occurs at different times for different people, the law has established a specific age for drawing the line between prepubescent children and minors. This line is generally set at 12 in the United States. Thus, legally speaking, anyone who engages in fantasies or sex acts with anyone under the age of 12 is a pedophile. Someone who fantasizes or engages in sex acts with someone older than 12 is not a pedophile. That common age is arbitrary and varies from state to state. But does a human adult become an adult sooner in West Virginia as opposed to New York or California? In recent decades, science has improved its understanding of pedophilia's causes, prenatal and early childhood risk factors, as well as how they can better control their natural impulses. One of the most significant findings is that pedophilia is determined in the womb, though environmental factors may influence naturally whether someone acts on an urge to abuse, proving the point once and for all that pedophilia is an inborn sexual orientation, like bisexuality, for example, and not a learned behavior, fetish, or kink. Not all people who sexually abuse children are pedophiles, and not all pedophiles abuse children. Many of the people who do in fact sexually abuse children do not sexually prefer them, but use them as a surrogate for an adult partner. The individual is likely to be antisocial with severe impulse control problems. Rapists will choose a victim regardless of sexual orientation. And since some heterosexual men rape women while jogging in parks at night, does that mean that all heterosexual men loiter in parks at night and are rapists? Of course not. The assumption that all pedophiles are rapists is flawed, dangerous, and absurd. It's also one of the contributing factors behind the extreme ignorance and hatred they suffer on a daily basis just for being alive. Researchers say that even with glaring red flags, People are notoriously unable to recognize child molesters or rapists because the people they respect simply don't fill the stereotypical image they have of monsters or predators. There is no defining look of a person who will abuse a child or an adult, as they come in all shapes and sizes. Michael Sato is a forensic research director at the Royal Ottawa Healthcare Group in Canada. His work in the field of psychology is highly renowned. He said recently that there is more neuroscientific knowledge of pedophilia than ever before. In fact, MRI research is now showing how sexual interests develop in the brain. His conclusion is that pedophilia, like other sexual orientations, is something people are born with, or at least have a predisposition to. He is quoted as saying, quote, "I think as a field we've accepted the idea that this is not something that people choose," end quote. This evidence-based stance is being more widely accepted as the proof keeps coming in. James Cantor, a clinical psychologist, sex researcher, and former editor-in-chief of Sexual Abuse, a Journal of Research and Treatment, has gone on the record saying, quote, "The evidence suggests it is inborn. It's neurological. Pedophilia is the attraction to children regardless of whether the person ever actually harms a child," end quote. So while Mr. Cantor's work has its roots in the data-driven scientific method, his findings are inescapably political to the many people who read them. He is careful, however, to distinguish between pedophilia, a natural biological condition and thus morally neutral, and the act of molesting a child, which is certainly not. A culture that no longer demonizes pedophiles may be one in which pedophiles themselves are more willing to seek help, and therefore one in which children are less likely to suffer abuse. There are child molesters and there are pedophiles. If you think of a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap. There are the people who have a sexual attraction to children, and there are some people who molest kids who are not pedophiles. They do it because of anger, because they're scared of adult women, or to get revenge. But they don't actually have an age preference for prepubescent children. Now I'm going to pose a question to you, the viewer, and I want you to think about the question and answer it honestly. You don't have to say the answer out loud, especially if there are other people in the room. But here's the question. Have you ever had an inappropriate sexual thought or urge? If your answer is no, then I, along with the professionals who study sexual psychology, will say that you're in denial. Of course people have inappropriate sexual thoughts. You may have an attraction to your sister's wife, your wife's sister. How about that? You may lust after a 16-year-old post-pubescent babysitter. It doesn't mean you act on it. It also, most importantly, doesn't make you a sexual deviant or even a bad person. Pedophiles may not have control over the fact that they have an attraction to kids, but they are responsible for whether they do or don't act on it. Imagine an automobile in its purest form. It has an engine, 4 wheels, and brakes. We all have inappropriate thoughts. That's the engine. But there are brakes, like empathy or fear of punishment, to keep us from acting on them. Most people do not go out and rape, rob, or murder on a whim. Their brakes are working properly to keep the engine in check. Pedophiles are no different. They also experience inappropriate thoughts like anyone else, but do not necessarily act on them. More research must be undertaken to understand why most pedophiles do not act on their attractions. Clinical observations suggest that some pedophiles with bad brakes have their early development in homes with mistreatment or neglect. A difficult upbringing can cause a host of problems in a developing child, antisocial behavior being one of them. This can also cause non-pedophiles to abuse children, adding to the scapegoating. You might remember recently in the news a professor at Old Dominion University who talked about destigmatizing pedophilia and referred to pedophiles as minor attracted people. He was forced to resign in November following an internet outcry over using that phrase. Yes, the professor lost his job because he wanted to help people. The victim of academic silencing, Alan Walker, argued that destigmatizing the attraction would allow more people to seek help and ultimately prevent child sexual abuse. Unbelievably, or maybe it's not very unbelievable given the rapidly falling median IQ in modern America, this caused an uproar. A man was metaphorically crucified for trying to reduce child sexual abuse. This kind of insanity begs the only reasonable question. Does America really want or even have a vested interest in trying to reduce or end child sexual abuse? Think of all the jobs and money that society will lose if, overnight, child sexual abuse suddenly decreases or ceases altogether. The entire prison warehousing industry that had for so long been propped up by racist drug laws now feeds itself off the ability to infinitely punish violent as well as non-violent sex offenders. Without a boogeyman on whom to place society's imaginary ills, the entire racket would collapse. This is why people get eviscerated for speaking out about it. Me, I couldn't care less what some sad, pathetic keyboard warrior has to say about me. But there is growing support in the field of psychology and in online forums for Walker's professional point of view. It has been said that there's no treatment that can turn a pedophile into a non-pedophile. Notice the word cure is never used. Can someone be cured of heterosexuality? Society has tried curing homosexuals for centuries before resigning to the fact that it's an inborn trait. It appears that pedophilia is benefiting from the advancements at a faster pace, much faster than society is willing to accept it. Pedophiles can, like everyone else, exhibit self-control and use compensatory strategies. This is far more likely if they're under the care of a professional. Pedophiles need to be able to access therapy, and that can be exceedingly difficult since those afflicted may be ashamed to seek help. Some also worry that the counselors might report them to the police for thought crimes, as is required in many states. And it's also a matter of funding. Private counseling is expensive, and pedophilia treatment isn't on most insurance plans. American society has come a long way over the past several decades. It has seen a more inclusive population that has become more tolerant of each other's differences. By the same measure, it has taken an enormous leap backwards when dealing with pedophiles. The sex offender registry, that we've all come to realize as infinite punishment, has caused much devastation to a large section of the population while doing little to help pedophiles get the treatment they need. It is a way to punish sex offenders, including pedophiles, for life, even if they hurt no one. These are people who were born with a sexual orientation they can't change, no different than a homosexual. The difference is how we treat them in our society. We no longer look at homosexuals as evil, immoral sinners, though unfortunately that is still the prevailing thought in some parts of the world. Instead, we focus our natural hatred for those who think differently on pedophiles and treat them as monsters lurking in the shadows. It is a fact that most people born as pedophiles do not ever harm or abuse a child. They may have fantasies in their minds like everyone else. The only difference is the actions. Even this is too much for many folks to be comfortable with. So we try to rid ourselves of them and those who dare to defend their right to live peacefully. When will we stop demonizing these minor attracted people and let them get the help and the belonging that they so desperately deserve? Do we not want to prevent child abuse? Isn't that the goal of all this unbridled ignorance? If we really want to protect children and create a future where they can truly be safe, then we need to stop letting our primitive emotions overrule our rational thinking. We must listen to, not ostracize, those dedicated to understanding this phenomenon and deal with just the facts, not the fear.